Hi, everyone. I'm Scarlett Johnson, and this is Moms for Liberty Unplugged. And I'm here with my guest, Meg. Oh my gosh, I forgot to take off my glasses. Now I can't see, but oh well, I don't have that glare. And today we're going to talk about a subject that we've talked about before, but I think it's a little more relevant now in light of the tragedy that happened this week in Minneapolis. It's the price we pay for gender ideology in schools. And there is a price to be paid. And Meg, you had a thread on X, and as soon as I read it, I contacted you and said, let's do a show and let's come on and talk about this. So I just want you to go through the thread that you wrote and also explain, you have a very extensive background on this subject. You are an investigative reporter. You have done a lot of research, and maybe explain to everyone how much research you've done so that they can understand your depth of knowledge on this subject.
Yeah, no, thanks, Scarlett. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Meg. I work for the Daily Caller News Foundation, and for the past 3 years, I've pretty much focused on only gender ideology, a few other things, but mostly gender ideology. I've done a lot of FOIA requests to uncover various parts of the gender pipeline, which schools play a huge part of. And so I've also done work with uncovering different things with WPATH, with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I have a background in nursing. I was actually a pediatric ICU nurse. So I do have an understanding of healthcare and how it functions, and just spent a lot of time trying to understand and uncover what is going on. Why are we seeing this huge spike in kids identifying as other sexes and who knows, Z's or whatever. But I think it's really important for people to understand and for us as a society to have answers as to how all of this happened.
And now let's talk about the thread, and I'm going to pull it up really fast. The thread that you put on X, which I think kind of said a lot, that gender ideology causes tremendous pain to individuals and families. We must stop sending kids down this deeply troubled path. Here is the heartbreaking path gender confused kids and teens are being placed on in America. What is that path?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we see something like what happened this week, that's such a tragedy, and the idea of what is transgenderism and what is it doing to people, are all these sex change medications and surgeries, what kind of impact are they having on a person? I think it's really easy to want to take a finger and point it at a very superficial thing as the problem, as oh my gosh, it must have been this one thing. But I think people really need to understand that there's an entire ecosystem, and that's, I would say, it's primarily in our schools, in our medicine, in our healthcare systems. It's our major national multi-million dollar funded national transgender activist organizations pressuring companies, pressuring social services. There's this whole ecosystem. And then the other big part of it, which I feel like is one of my soapboxes, I'm sure it's probably one of yours, is the danger of cell phones. Over the past 3 years, I've talked to and written about different stories with parents who've had their children sucked into gender ideology. And so many of the stories reflect that one of the first kind of points of contact their child, who was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, that kind of age group had with gender ideology was in a Discord chat, or maybe it was even in a video game, or it was on Instagram. And their child starts communicating with someone who has an adult, possibly, who has a transgender flag in their profile, and the next thing you know, there's an element of real grooming happening with that child. And so what I did with this thread was just try to help create a picture, or give a picture or a snapshot of this pipeline, to understand that I mean, it can be, obviously there's all different ways kids get sucked into this, but I think a lot of times it's a systems problem more than an individual problem. And I think I would say that in terms of when I was a nurse, if there was a medical error that happened on the floor, somebody would report it. And if you work at a good institution, they won't the first reaction isn't to blame the person who made the mistake. It's to take a look at what are the systems that enabled this mistake to happen with patient care. And so I think with this thread, I'm trying to really create an understanding of what are the systems that are creating an ecosystem that children are getting sucked in, and then parents are getting bullied and coerced to push their child further down this pipeline.
So, and you start off to say a unique child that is possibly neurodivergent or has unresolved trauma, often sexual assault, feels discomfort with their body during puberty. And I have spoken to many medical professionals, and they have told me that almost universally, children that suffer early from gender dysphoria, body dysmorphia, that feel uncomfortable in their own body, they have trauma in their lives. That's number one thing they see. They have some sort of trauma. Maybe it could be a divorce, it could be abuse, it could be just something that's happened in their life that happened at a certain age and they were deeply psychologically affected, or they're autistic, they're neurodivergent. Almost universally, those issues come into play. And when we're not resolving, when medical professionals, those true underlying issues, and only dealing with kind of that surface issue, then this is bad for the child, and also, I think, bad precedent in medicine.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. If you take the time and listen, there are a bunch of detransitioners that are on Twitter or represented at different organizations. And like you're saying, a lot of their stories do sadly involve some form of trauma. I think it makes sense, particularly when I think of young women. You think of, like, say, a girl who was sexually victimized as a child. Well, when you're going through puberty and you're becoming a woman, that's probably going to make you very uncomfortable because you're relating it back to your past trauma. So you have these girls, you have a high incidence, a high overlap of kids who identify as transgender and autism. I mean, I've listened to, I don't know if we know the exact numbers, but it's to the point where there was a gender clinic in Washington that actually had a combined autism transgender program. It's just like so crazy. So yeah, you're exactly right. When you have kids who are having distress, who are in a vulnerable position, and I always just think about puberty in general is an uncomfortable time. I know there are people who had, like, were just an amazingly smooth ride through being a teenager. I was not one of them.
No,
The
I
teenage years
wasn't.
were very awkward and very painful for me. Um, and so I think about that transition is already a very difficult time, just under normal, good circumstances, right? Just under a normal 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl or boy whose body is changing and they're having to grapple with growing up. Like, that's already difficult anyway. So now we're taking kids in this vulnerable time, and instead of addressing the problems, pushing them towards this crazy pathway of giving them drugs that are going to render them infertile, amongst other things. It's just real. It's madness, in my opinion.
Jamie Reed, who is the whistleblower from St. Louis, she came to Wisconsin and testified before our state legislature on a bill which would end gender medicine, gender transitions, gender affirming care for minors. And she testified for over an hour. And I thought I knew a lot, but boy, did she open my eyes. And we had some other medical professionals testify as well. And it's just shocking what she saw. And she is lesbian. She said, I considered myself very progressive, totally on board the LGBTQIA plus, and like I was all in. And when I saw what was happening and who it was happening to, she's like, I knew it was wrong. Like, I had to do something. I had to say something. And so what she did, shut down these clinics in St. Louis. And I think, to right now across America, where politicians were fully aware of what's going on with federal dollars, with state dollars, and that we absolutely cannot fund this really malpractice in medicine that's occurring right now. But it's happening because what Jamie saw is happening. What Jamie saw, she saw kids instantly. They'd come in and say, I identify as trans. And they might have files this high with all sorts of issues and depression and anxiety, suicide attempts, cutting, bulimia, all those things, and push it to the side and say, that's your problem. Let's get you on the path for gender affirming care, get you some hormones, temporary fix, puberty blockers, breasts remove if you're a girl, all of that. Found the solution. And then, maybe the parents think, after dealing with a child with all of those issues, they think, well, finally, there's a solution. Okay, we can fix this. And the doctor and the professionals told me that this is the path to take, so we should. And the kids might feel relieved, like, finally, I can end all this pain. It's relatively easy, right? And so I think that the medicine as an institution in our country has really failed their mission of do no harm. I mean, you are a nurse. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that when I first got involved in this issue, I heard Chloe Coles. She gave a speech, I think, outside of in Washington D.C. somewhere, and I remember hearing her story and thinking it was so crazy, especially when they talked about how she talked about how, the hospital had given her a double mastectomy, and I just thought, surely this is like you almost don't believe it when you first hear it because it's so crazy. And I think having worked in a pediatric institution, I mean, I have so much respect for people who work with sick kids because it's really, really difficult. You have to have a lot of training. You have to have a lot of intelligence I mean, some of these doctors are just absolutely brilliant. You have a lot of empathy. I mean, I think about the nurses I worked with and how compassionate and caring they were to their patients, to the families. So then to learn that this was going on at these institutions that are really doing so much good work, it was really shocking. And I'd say, like, how I just to kind of tie it back, to take a couple steps back with the kid who say is having distress, maybe saw something online. Well, then the schools are a big piece of this pipeline. How I got involved in this issue is I found out, I was tipped off by a dad in my community that a major gender clinic was providing trainings or trying to provide trainings in the school districts in my county. So basically teaching teachers to have quote unquote gender affirming classrooms. So I think what happens is you have this kid who's confused, they go to school, and then we know all across the country there are kids who are being secretly socially transitioned. And what that means is the school's like, oh, you think you're a boy? Well, sure, we're going to give you a boy's name. Oh, you think you're a girl or sorry, a boy who thinks he's a girl, we're going to give you a girl's name. And they'll start treating that child like they're the other sex. They'll probably have them join like an after school LGBTQ club, maybe like a GSA club. I had written about that. I think we talked about that last time, the Gender and Sexualities Alliance, which is not just, it started out as a kind of a support group for kids who were gay, and now it's transformed. They even transformed their name to Gender and Sexuality, so it's really, has a strong component of gender ideology. So you have this kid who's being secretly transitioned at school, and then what can happen is that child, probably like you're saying, is feeling, they're starting to feel good, like, I have all these people who love me at this school, they're telling me like how brave I am. So then they perhaps decide they want to take the next step, they want to start medically transitioning. And so the school can call the parent, and that may be the first time the parent hears anything about this. They may have no idea that their child has been going to one of these clubs or has been called a different name. And one other just thing before I'll stop, but about social transition is, I'm sure you're familiar with the Cass Review, which was this big report that the National Health Service in England put out in April of 2024. So they did a little long investigation into the evidence of child sex change. And one of the lines that stood out to me the most in the whole report was the finding that socially transitioning a child didn't really lead to better outcomes in terms of like improving their mental health, but it did make them more likely to medical transition. So I think when we talk about schools and you think about the work that Moms for Liberty is doing in trying to have transparency and stop gender ideology, you're really stopping a critical piece of that pipeline that is going to kind of suck a child in towards medical interventions.
Yeah, I'm looking through to have some slides looking for GSA clubs, but what we're talking about, how it's in the schools, these are some of the lesson plans for what is called comprehensive sexuality education. And CSE is used in schools all across the country, but the concepts that you see here can be embedded into many different curriculums. And there, what we're looking at right here, these are lesson plans given to a teacher. So these lesson plans can be used in human growth and development, but there's materials there that could be used in any class. And in professional development, teachers are encouraged to use these words, trusted adult instead of parents, family, pregnant person instead of mother. It's all of that kind of woke terminology, but this is what is expected as early as kindergarten, grade 1. These are the expectations placed upon educators, whether they want to or not. So, and I also wanted to add that, I have, as you know, I have a son that's a doctor. I have a daughter that's in nursing school, their dad, a surgeon. So when I talk about the medical community, I know that the majority of those in the medical community are not on board with what's happening. They do not subscribe to providing puberty blockers without parental consent or knowledge to kids, and they don't think that kids who have long histories of mental illness should be put on this track. The vast majority don't, just like the vast majority of teachers don't want to indoctrinate and brainwash kids. However, the institutions are set up with a bias, and the pressure that's put on those who work in those institutions and in those fields means they're not going to speak up. They might just go along. And when that happens, then there's no protection. There's no guardrails. And that institutional capture is really what we're trying to address.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I mean, I think about in healthcare, I did a story last year on how several activist organizations lobbied the medical board. So the medical in Pennsylvania, this was in Pennsylvania, in the Board of Nursing, the Board of Medicine, to basically adopt a policy that gave them the authority to discipline anyone with a license, whether it's like a nursing license, medical license, a counselor license. Where they could discipline them if they were caught engaging in alleged conversion therapy. And conversion therapy is a word that, again, so much of this is language that's been hijacked. So
Mhm.
it's definitely in the past has represented things that has been tagged to things that were legitimately abusive. Like you think about there's an example on one of the activist websites where they have a kid who went to a camp that was like making this poor child like carry rocks because they were gay. And I mean, obviously that's not conversion therapy, that's child abuse. And that's terrible. But the problem is now they've taken the word conversion therapy and on their definition and how it's defined, for example, in these state policies, it's if you have a girl who thinks she's a boy and you're trying to address her underlying issues and help her feel comfortable with who she is. She's a girl, she's a young woman. That is allegedly conversion therapy because you are converting her gender identity, which that's another big linguistic term.
Yes.
That's how someone feels about their sex. So activists believe you have a sex and you have a gender identity, which is which is not true. You don't. You have a sex, full stop. But that is, again, like, to your point. I mean, all of these things, and it's that poor clinician is like, okay, not only might they lose their job, they could lose their whole livelihood if they were to lose their license.
When you talk about the sex gender identity, I think of the gender snow person
Hmm.
or the gender unicorn, where they'll talk about sex, gender identity, gender expression, gender expansion, all of all of those terms. And for kids, they'll kind of have that picture, and they separate all of these things instead of just talking about personality.
Hmm.
Just because you're a girl that's sort of a tomboy, especially before you hit puberty or right as you hit puberty, that you like to wear jeans instead of dresses, that doesn't mean that you are really just a boy inside. Like you're just a boy. That's just a characteristic. That's just
Hmm.
a trait, a part of a whole complicated story of who you are. And I was kind of a tomboy, and
Hmm.
I did not like dresses. I would rather hang out with my dad and my brothers than girls until I didn't. And then
Hmm.
14, 15, and my discomfort with my body, which is pretty normal, as you said, when you start puberty, I became comfortable. And, you know, I felt, I was happy to be a woman, and, then started to dress and, kind of like your curves and all of those things, but you don't at first. That's a normal reaction. And if there's trauma, well, then of course you're going to um, kind of punish yourself. These are all like this is kind of, it's a terrible thing, but textbook with, as far as a psychologist or psychiatrist, it's normal to feel like I don't even want to be in my own body.
Hmm.
Um, but when you start to hate your own body, that level of pain should not be masked with, hey, you're transgender and here's some puberty blockers. And
Hmm.
by doing so, I think we look at the tragedy, we look at the mental illness. And I'm not trying to say that everyone who identifies as trans is a potential violent person, but when you've got a group of people that are not well, that are suffering from trauma, pain, and mental illness, and you're not addressing it, I think that ins- there are going to be issues that didn't need to happen had we properly cared and addressed the issues early on in someone's childhood.
Hmm. Well, I
And
think
it's
that's, yeah. So that's what's so sad about it. You have all these vulnerable kids who genuinely need help. Like, they're genuinely confused, they're struggling, and they need help. And it's not helpful to tell them the lie and convince them of the lie that who they are is so horrific that in order to gain love or to feel comfortable, they have to completely change their entire identity, including their physical form.
there was a quote you that's, oh, what is, I had it right here. Yes, that you reposted and then I reposted with Moms for Liberty by Gerald Posner. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but from the Minneapolis's Killers Journal, and there was disturbing images. I am tired of being trans. I wish I never brainwashed myself. That word brainwashed exposes what too many kids are being sold as gender affirming care. It's a cult fueled by ideologues, profiteers, and medical collaborators.
Mhm.
That's a profound statement.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to even again this idea of gender and gender identity, which maybe it's, I don't know if it's like we're just trying to explain when we talk about cult, we talk about not being real. The word gender had been used back in the 1800s as as a linguistic term. And it was always attached to a person's sex. So there was no confusion as to when someone was discussing or using that term, that it wasn't simply being used to describe a sex. It wasn't a standalone thing. And what happened was in the 1950s, these disgusting sexologists really created and morphed the term gender into gender identity to be its own separate thing. And you'd actually had posted this earlier this week. It was almost like if you think of Peter Pan and his shadow, right? How his shadow reflects what's real. So we'd always kind of use this term gender to as a very vague representation of what it means to be male and female. Kind of how if you see someone's shadow, you're like, oh, you could probably tell if they're male or female, but it's not definitive. It's not really clear. It doesn't tell you a whole lot about them. It's just a very vague. But what happened is the gender ideologues and the activists basically took Peter, entered Fantasyland, and decided to disconnect gender and sex and elevate gender to gender identity. Where now these external reflections of a person or sex stereotypes, they're saying that's as real. The shadow is as real as the person casting the shadow. And so
Um,
when we talk about being brainwashed by someone like or a kid in this cult, it's all in a fantasy land, because the only thing you have is you have a sex, you have a personality, you have things that you like to do. They may or may not fit those stereotypes, the sex stereotypes, but all the things that are external that you do are not what make you who you are. And so the idea that there's a mismatch, I mean, really, it truly is an ideological fantasy land. And to tell children to keep them in that fantasy and to just continue to morph their bodies and to harm their bodies on an idea that's completely not based in reality, it really is going to obviously exacerbate a person's pain in the long run. And that's what's
yes,
so sad.
I would put up briefly like your thread with the Peter Pan, which I thought was very apt. That the shadow, saying that the shadow is real, when it's the fantasy, and by affirming this mental illness, I'm starting to call it mental illness affirming care. That's not really care. There are real dangers. And if you look at the journal, the manifesto of this shooter, 23-year-old male, lots history of some of issues, identifying as Robin instead of his given name Robert. But one thing that was very profound, and what an image that he drew of himself looking in the mirror, and in the mirror was a literal like demon. And that's kind of how he saw himself. And then to write, these words, I was brainwashed and all of this, and just stewed in all of this mania, and then was allowed to, as to go out and fire into a church.
Mm.
All of these children caused pain, trauma, two innocent children, 8 and 10 years old. Watching the videos of the parents and the kids, I was crying this morning as I'm watching, extinguishing the life. This coward did this, and my initial reaction as a parent is I was very angry that in this fight, that there are those that still just can't see what's at stake and the harm. And the shooter ended up taking his own life as well.
Mhm.
All the loss, all the suffering, all the pain, all the families, all the kids that have now been traumatized, the community, all of this, the loss, the senseless loss of life. And I can't help but think that had this man received the mental health care that he needed instead of affirming care, maybe things would have been different.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely horrific to think about what happened at that school and to those kids and to those families. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Yeah, it took some time, like today, finally to talk about it, because it's horrifying.
Mm.
And as an example, I had talked with Marsha McCleary earlier this week, and this week she went to this community high school district 128 school board meeting and this is a district in Illinois, and their gender support guideline reflects a typical gender support plan in Illinois. And when you see reading this confidentiality, meaning that they don't have to tell parents anything. So if a student K through 12 says identify as trans, the counselors, administrators, teachers are not supposed to tell the parents. They can't tell anyone without the kid's permission. Mm-hmm. And then curriculum and pedagogy. It says all personnel will use gender-affirming approach to create a learning environment in which transgender and gender-expansive students are able to live as the gender in which they identify. And if you read further in this plan, no medical proof is required, none. This is just however they identify. And they can use the facilities that they identify with. They can join the athletic teams or the groups in the gender at which they identify. And there are no restrictions. And the fact that there is this books, curriculum, all will reflect. They must reflect this approach, this gender affirming approach. They even have a what do they call it? A gender response team. It was pretty crazy and typical. This is typical in Illinois. And so while we can say, oh, we've got federal law, we've got Title IX, and the Trump administration is fighting back. This is the reality for a lot of school districts still. Mm-hmm. And and obviously Minnesota, Tampon Tim, they have a policy like this. This is probably the policies of most public schools. Now, the school that was attacked was a Catholic school. This wasn't a public school, but this ideology, this institutional capture, taints, is the poison well from which we're all drinking. The reality, we all are forced to live because a few, they are determined to live in fantasy land.
Right. And you think about thinking of it in terms of like an ecosystem rather than a lesson you're going to opt out of. Like, obviously, there are, certain states where you can opt out of things like comprehensive sexual education. But what you just read, that's so comprehensive. That's not one teacher or one club or, one lesson. That's really creating an ecosystem that is going to bring a kid into fantasy land, into this belief that you can change your sex and it's going to be continually affirmed. What you said about comprehensive sex education, that's young ages, it starts at kindergarten. So essentially you're normalizing gender ideology and this real actual misinformation to kids as young as 5 who have no ability to comprehend or decipher any of that.
And so here is the image of the gender support, or the gender person. And I want to go back a little bit on this, because if you look, so where it starts, this is a training creating LGBTQ plus affirming elementary schools. And GSAFE is a group that, for the GSA clubs, so they are in charge of GSA clubs in Wisconsin, and they're offshoot of the Human Rights Campaign. So the Human Rights Campaign, as you know, will provide resources and literature and toolkits for teachers, counselors, administrators in school districts that want to start a rainbow club or a GSA club, some type of LGBTQIA plus celebration club or tolerance respect club, something like that. These clubs will meet in elementary school. They're designed to meet during lunch, recess, at a time where parents, they may not know that this is happening. And though there's policy and plans in some districts that say we don't have to tell you. I've seen professional development as educators discuss how to hide this from parents, and if parents find out, how to skillfully talk them off a ledge. But the question in this slideshow was, is elementary school too young? And the answer is no, it's not too young. And so look at ages 2 and 3 right there. They're advocating 2 and 3, 3 and 4. This is how soon that you can start to talk to kids about this, because they believe at 2 and 3, kids start to know that they are transgender at 2 and 3. And you're a mom, I'm a mom. And no way. No way.
I mean, 2 and 3, you're like, really, I mean, if they can pick out an outfit that matches, you're feeling pretty good, you know?
Well, 2 and 3, what do you
do?
What is the tell sign that my son, who's now married to a woman, that he wanted to play with his cousin, play dolls and kitchen with her when he was 2? Was I supposed to say, "Oh, light bulb, he's really
Right.
a woman"? Or that his cousin wanted to play cars and trucks with him, that she's no, like that. It's it. How would you, that?
Well, that's where, I mean, I think when they say gender identity, right, or even gender, if you ask someone to provide a definition for that, it always has to, it inherently has to include the words to reference one of the sexes, because it's not something on its own. So it could be an I believe WPATH's definition is something along the lines of like an internal feeling of your sex, or so what you're saying is actually what they believe, that these external things. So whether, I mean, that's where we see, a man decides to put on a dress and put lipstick on. Well, if you believe that being a woman is merely external stereotypes, then you believe that by fulfilling external stereotypes, that makes you a woman. Likewise, if you believe that, to your point, like if you believe a woman is external, then you could say, well, the 3-year-old likes to play with babies and makeup. So they're fulfilling these external stereotypes. Therefore, they must be a different sex, which is totally nuts. Obviously, it's crazy. But I think like people who are activists on this issue, just genuinely, that is what they believe.
And if on the screen I have, gender exists on a spectrum. And so they're, male, female, both, neither. And this is a lesson plan for elementary school students. And they claim that this is honest, medically accurate. You'll see here, the rights, respect, responsibility, sex, etc., the part of human growth and development. And this is I always show the receipts to show that I didn't just kind of pull this out of a hat. This is actually from curriculum and video about puberty, transgender youth. These are different videos that are given that for children. I mean, I'm not even going to say, I can't even say all of this stuff. But here are the resources: G-Safe, Welcoming Schools, Gender Spectrum, Amaze, the Treasure Project, the Family Acceptance Project. These are multi-million-dollar, well-funded activist organizations that are deeply political. Welcoming Schools will provide an entire curriculum. I know I actually purchased thousands of pages of curriculum and went through it myself. I purchased it, but they offer it for free. They have donors that will sponsor. So if a teacher wants this curriculum and can't afford it, they can be sponsored. And you could, even in a district, let's say there's a school district where they have a great school board, they really do their best to focus on education and not get caught into kind of trendy, pseudoscientific stuff like this. Well, you could have a rogue teacher that gets this curriculum and tries to implement it. It happens all the time, and you have to pay attention. But this is what is in schools. So when you ask, how does this man at 23 years old, how did he get to that place that he did? How do so many get to as far as they have? How could you remove your own breast? Let's just say not violent, that all of the violence is sort of perpetuated on yourself, that you're mutilating your own body, that a good person and a person that's just needing help, but they're sort of taking all their pain out on their own body. And what are the statistics? You would know this, and I don't have the graphic for it right now, but what do you remember the statistics of the kids that become adults that go through everything? The ultimate, they start to remove their genitalia. How happy are they at the end of that road?
Yeah, I don't think we honestly really know or even know how many kids are detransitioning. A part of that is because when we talk about the capture of the medical associations, so people may not be aware, but the American Medical Association is who produces CPT codes. The World Health Organization produces ICD codes, and these are the two codes that are used to bill insurance. And not only do they, so you have these databases. When people do research, a lot of times they're pulling from these databases to see like, oh, did someone have to have a follow-up surgery, or how many, there was a study that showed there was a tripling of sex change surgeries, and I forget the exact age demographic from like 2000, I believe it was 2016 to 2019. Well, how do you get the information? You pull the insurance codes, but there aren't insurance codes for detransitioners. So there aren't codes to reflect and track and then understand how many kids are detransitioning or are regretful of their procedures. And that again comes back to the original, one of the original things we are talking about, of how the medical institutions are so captured, that to even get a grip on the problem and how significant the problem is, we can't even really do that because we don't have the resources to really track this adequately.
And you said, and I was going through some of your research. I'm reading a post you put on Facebook where you said, I want to get this right, that a surgeon actually called it an adventure for young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What
that was when I last May, so through a public records request, I unearthed a folder of almost 30 hours of recordings from WPATH Scientific Symposium that was in September 2022, right around when the standards of care came out. So if anyone in the audience doesn't know who WPATH is, they're arguably the most influential transgender medical organization in the world. Their guidance, which is the standards of care, has been used to inform government policies, to inform insurance coverage. It's also used as the basis for a lot of other medical guidance. So when you see other organizations like the AAP or the Endocrine Society, they're all kind of referencing a lot of times they're going to be referencing WPATH's guidance. So just they're very, very influential. And I obtained this folder of a private symposium, and this one doctor who was talking about, I had to listen to, I want to say it was like 4 hour talk about genital surgery. It was quite gruesome and unpleasant to say the least. But this doctor did actually say that when he was talking about mentioning like the high complication rates, and says, it's going to be an adventure for young people. And we're talking about like removing, I don't want to get too graphic, but really, really awful procedures that are removing people's genital organs and can have extremely horrific complications, and really create a lot of problems even when they're quote unquote successful.
This is shocking. Keep the voices down. In Unearthed video, doctors discuss putting mentally ill patients, including kids, on hormones. This is all part of the WPATH tapes. And again, so that there's the understanding is clear. What does the WPATH do? Why are their recommendations so important, and how do they affect medicine in America?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're the organization that other organizations are pulling from to create their own guidance. So if you like, I would say if you look at your insurance policy or your state's insurance policy, I can use Pennsylvania as an example. When they in their child Medicaid program, when they have their booklet of what kind of procedures are covered, when they come to the quote unquote gender affirming care section, they reference WPATH. So if you really want to do like a little bit of work, I would say go to, you can, this can be a challenge. Go to any medical organization, government policy, even school board policies maybe that are talking about child sex change, especially if they're for it, I'd say there's a very strong likelihood that somewhere they're going to mention WPATH. WPATH also this past, I guess it wasn't this summer, like a year ago, there was a lot of controversy when documents came out in a case Bo v. Marshall about showing that Rachel Levin was pressuring WPATH to remove the lower age limits of sex change surgery. So instead of saying like, okay, you should have this surgery, you should wait till you're 16, it's like, well, there's no real limit to how young someone can be. And that was quite a controversy because it really showed the political nature of this allegedly scientific medical guidance. The Trump administration has called it junk science. HHS wrote a letter where they strongly advised physicians not to base their clinical recommendations on the standards of care. So if anyone wants to read about that rabbit hole, there's a ton of stuff out there you can read. It is quite alarming.
So, and I had just read and posted, I think it was yesterday, that it wasn't until 2019 that gender dysphoria was classified as a mental illness. And the reason was that if it's not classified in I'm going to say the
DSM-5, yeah.
DSM-5, then procedures won't be covered by insurance. Am I right about that?
I think it happened in 2013, and so DSM-5 is like the my gosh, American Psychological Association. Hopefully, I said that right. There's so many different associations to remember, who will have the kind of like the book of different diagnoses patients can have, and they changed the previous diagnosis, which is mental illness, to make it gender dysphoria. I think it was gender identity. I forget the exact term, but and now it's changed to gender dysphoria, which I mean, I think it's just, again, we're normalizing these things, right? Like something that we used to recognize that, okay, if you think you're a different sex, that's a sign of mental, like, I mean, you need help, right? Versus, oh, you're just versus when it's gender dysphoria, where you say, oh, it's just distress. Okay, well, instead of like seeing it as an illness we need to treat, we're just going to treat these feelings. And
Okay.
so we're going to relieve your distress, not by dealing with your issues and seeing like, hey, why are you afraid, or what is making you upset, or what is causing you to distress about your sex. We're going to change, instead of taking that approach, it does kind of normalize the approach of we're going to change your body to relieve your distress, rather than seeing you as someone with a complex psychological issue that needs a lot of help and some digger, oh my gosh, deeper digging. Jeez, I'm sorry. I need
Yeah,
a cup of
that's
coffee.
there.
I,
To-
guys, just one more thing though to add that
Sure, yeah,
like
go ahead.
people should know too is that for kids, I don't know, again, the exact statistics I think are muddied, but I've heard it, people say as much as 90% of kids will naturally resolve their dysphoria, will naturally resolve this distress by going through puberty. So when we talk about like how do we help kids, well, let them go through puberty. Let's help them work through whatever, if they have past trauma, if they have vulnerabilities, let's come alongside them. Let's teach them to value themselves as a unique individual, rather than someone who has to conform to whatever stereotypes they think they need to conform to, because that in fact is what is likely going to really help them the most.
That's great. That I've read that same statistic many times, many different areas, and in fact, the premier researcher on gender dysphoria was a Canadian psychiatrist who treated and published 30 years of work on this condition. And I don't remember the name right now, but I'm sure someone could find that. He said that for the majority of the time, it was high 80s, maybe 90%. These feelings resolved themselves with puberty by 18, 19 years old. And what was interesting compared to now, mainly it was men, boys. This was almost uniquely a male experience, males who experienced this gender dysphoria. It's a new phenomenon that young prepubescent girls that's, and Abigail Schreier has dealt with this in her book and reflected the some of the work that there was a doctor, psychologist who had presented with her with some research that even they were afraid to put out because of how I don't know, how woke, how to actually challenge the status quo, how hard it was to do. And so there's a lot of things going on. So I think that you're right. Traditionally, these things resolve themselves according to all the research prior to what, like 2013, 2014, 15. And then that we have this phenomenon of girls now identifying as boys, or non-binary, claiming that they were distressed in their own body. Majority of these are white girls, a lot of them more affluent to begin with, girls that suffer from prior issues like cutting, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and girls that were autistic, neurodivergent. So that's kind of a situation, a kind of a new situation. But I will also, I want you to talk about that. And one more thing, I'll pile on to all the questions. The Food and Drug Administration, have they approved the drugs that we currently use? We, by I mean American medical institutions, their protocol to treat gender dysphoria. Are those approved by the FDA?
No, the estrogen, testosterone, puberty blockers, they're used off label. So they have not had that approval process for the specific diagnoses. And I think like with puberty blockers, for example, I mean, when they're used to treat precocious puberty, I've talked to like endocrinologists and doctors who say, it's generally before age 8, like when you're having a really young kid, because an average puberty can start around like, I mean, 8's probably younger, but 9, 10, that by that age you're starting, it's normal and healthy to start puberty, so you wouldn't be blocking it. But when people are giving kids puberty blockers, I mean, they're giving them puberty blockers at age 11, 12, 13, even 14, for probably a much longer period of time. So if you're giving a child puberty blockers for precocious puberty, you have a very set endpoint, right? You're like, okay, we're going to give this kid puberty blockers until they're 8 or till they're 9, and it's going to end. So there's a firm stop. When you're starting a kid on puberty blockers for the treatment of gender dysphoria, it's like, a pause button that doesn't necessarily have a hard stop. And one of the real, I mean, there's a lot of problems. There's a huge problem with bone mass. So your bone density really needs to, like, you need to be depositing calcium. There's a lot of, there's plenty of research showing that kids, when they're put on puberty blockers, their calcium stores go. They're not getting the calcium they need, and that can impact them for the rest of their lives. There's brain development issues. We don't know. I mean, puberty. When you think about how powerful hormones are, and how puberty is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a natural maturation process of the body, and all of these good things are happening. Like even like everything in your body is changing. So when you just suddenly stop that when it's not supposed to be stopped and for a prolonged amount of time, I mean, we really just don't even have any idea how long, what the long-term effects of that are going to be. But yeah. And then another one, I would say estrogen. I mean, I did a story, it was a really, really sad story, about a 26-year-old young man who actually died from when he was taking estrogen. He had a cardiovascular issue. And I was doing like all these deep dives into estrogen, and it was really shocking to me because I didn't realize like how many precautions there are for even women taking estrogen because of the risk of thrombosis. There's all kinds of risks associated with it. When you're a woman, if you're taking estrogen, they're going to want to make sure that you don't have like any clotting issues that would make you more prone to a thrombotic event. And yet, when you're a young man, this young man, to everyone's knowledge, was not tested for any kind of thrombosis issue, that did run in his family. And he ended up passing away. And there was quite a few different markers or symptoms leading up to his death that reflected like possibly he was going to have a cardiovascular event. But there aren't, this is all the wild, wild west, right? So there aren't like protocols, and the normal protocols you would take are just, I mean, I guess almost you could say irrelevant to a degree, because these are drugs are not being used the way they're supposed to be used. But that story was just so heartbreaking to me. It was just heartbreaking for the whole for the mom, and the loss of a life is just always just a tragedy.
Yes, and I have your investigative work up on the screen, and to follow you, just I'll go back to see that you work with the Daily Caller, and so this is a story that you broke in March, and this is just absolutely tragic. It's tragic. Um, by using estrogen in a way that's not approved by the FDA, how is it that how can they do this? How how is it okay that
Mm.
this kind of treatment can be prescribed if it's not approved? So, especially if on kids,
Hmm.
it's I know that you would do some experimental treatment, like if you have cancer and
Hmm.
stage 4, yeah, I'll do anything. I want to try and live. And
Hmm.
you could see the reasoning behind that. Okay, this we don't know fully the effects, but we're going to try this. This is an experiment because when you and weighing the costs, it's worth it to give it a try. This is in the case of this young man, a young healthy man. Before that, healthy, physically healthy. How
Hmm.
can you justify using experimental drugs, an experimental protocol, one that if you've talked to doctors who aren't working for Planned Parenthood, and they're not part of this very few group that are involved in this gender affirming care, and you would tell them this protocol, they would say absolutely not. That's too risky. You shouldn't do that.
Hmm.
How are they allowed to do this?
I
Or
mean,
they
I
were.
think,
I know we're trying to stop it now, but
the off label, people do use off drugs off label in medicine. I mean, it's not necessarily like it does happen. But I think how they justify using these drugs that are very can be very high risk and have a lot of serious consequences is it comes back down to one of the myths that I talked about in that Twitter thread of like the myth that if you don't quote unquote transition or give your child a medical sex change, they're going to then become suicidal and die. And so that, I mean, how many times did we hear that coming from the Biden administration? This lie, this myth, it's been debunked that kids are going to be more, they're going to have like this complete breakdown and they're going to die. So that is what then I think creates, again, I don't agree with this, but people will say then that makes these sex changes medically necessary because they're going to quote unquote save that person's life. So whenever you're giving anyone a procedure, I think about like working in the ICU, we'd have a discussion every morning at my patient's bedsides, and we talk about the risks and the benefits of any intervention we were giving. So obviously, if like somebody is really, really sick, you're going to do or be okay with a higher level of risk for a procedure to save their life, right? Because if you don't do it, they're probably they might not live. So, but then if someone's in for like say, you're in because you have like a GI bug and you just need some IV fluids because you're dehydrated, well then you're not going to give that person the treatments you're going to give them aren't the same level of risk as someone who doesn't have like any blood pressures bottoming out and they're septic, because there's a difference. The medically necessity of different treatments are different according to the patient's condition. So all that to say, you have to actually, in my opinion, have to fully buy into this idea that giving a child sex change interventions is going to save them from ending their lives in order to justify the incredibly high risks of all of these different procedures, from like the puberty blockers to the surgeries. And so that is such a powerful lie that's told to parents. I have so much empathy for parents when coming back to where this conversation started. When you think about a parent who knows their child is struggling and they don't know what to do, and you're a mom, I'm a mom, when your kid's hurting and you want to help them, that's like the most, I don't can imagine feeling any more vulnerable than that. When your child needs help and you don't know how to help them, you are extremely vulnerable. And then a doctor comes to you, the experts you're supposed to trust, and tell you, well, if you don't do this, your child's life is going to end. Well, I mean, what is the parent supposed to do? They love their, obviously, we would hope that there's enough information and resources to combat that, but they're just put in this really horrific place. And I just feel so badly for anyone who's been put in that position. It's extremely coercive.
And that's, I put up the slide before, but pronouns save lives. So this is, state superintendent of Wisconsin, and similar, you'll hear JB Prickster, you'll hear Gavin Newsom, you'll hear Tampon Tim Walz, you'll hear any of the governors of states in which they are refusing to follow Title IX. They're refusing to, they're trying to fight all the directives from the Trump administration, the CDC, HHS, all of the organizations that are trying to defund this gender affirming care, at least to remove the federal funding. And the lawsuits that piled up, so many, trying to just make it illegal for doctors and for nurses, for organizations, for Planned Parenthood, what have you, group, to provide this care to minors. At the very least, I mean, some people would say this might be dangerous for anyone, but at the very least, let's not interrupt puberty for minors, especially with a condition that its resolution will happen after puberty. We're very most likely, there's a very high likelihood that kids that are experiencing this discomfort with their body are same-sex attracted. That's another argument, that they will just grow into healthy adults that are same-sex attracted, or they will maybe get the medical help they need and realize, I have a different underlying disorder, and I am okay with my body. Like Chloe Cole, like so many, my friend Luca, so many detransitioners we know that grew as they became 19 years old, 18, 19, 20 years old. I want to embrace my womanhood, and they detransition or desist. And they have a very compelling story, yet they're treated horribly. They're ignored by mainstream traditional media, completely ignored, and then treated just so terribly by the trans activists. It's just awful.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, I think that the detransitioners who are speaking up, I just have so much respect for them and for their courage, because I think they're telling their story and putting them in a position where they're made very vulnerable. And they really are so brave. And I mean, I know that hearing Chloe Cole is what really why I became, it was one of the main factors in how I began engaged in this issue, because I heard her and I just thought, I mean, gosh, how can I, as a responsible adult, know that this is happening like 35 minutes away from where I live and not care? Like that's where I just think like what is going on, and how kids are being treated is just so terrible in this regard. And I just think, how can we? It's just whatever. I mean, it's not, and I've never seen this really as a political issue at all. I've always just seen this as like a basic human decency issue of every child deserves to make it to adulthood without engaging in a medical system that's going to render them infertile, that's going to remove healthy body parts of their body before they can even drive, that's going to potentially rob young women of being mothers one day. I mean, I think about myself at 12 or 13 or 14. I had no idea what any of those things even meant, what it even
No.
meant to be a woman,
Yeah.
let alone what it would mean to be a mother and to have a child, have children, and all of those beautiful things in life that are gifts. And so to take a child and like just rob them of so much is just absolutely horrible. And I think we all have a responsibility to not allow that in our society.
And so we've talked about the big issue rather than addressing these underlying problems. The distress, the confusion is normalized and affirmed in school by teachers and clubs. The child can be socially transitioned at school to the point where the parents that I've talked to that feel helpless and they eventually start to go along with the transition, because by the time they find out what has been happening, it's far gone. The kid, that their kid has been socially affirmed and been socially transitioning for a year, maybe longer. And because counselors, teachers, even medical providers did not make the parents aware of what was happening, because the child knows, and children are children, teenagers are teenagers, they are going, if they know that their mom or dad are not going to go along with it, well, they'll try to make sure that the parents don't find out about it. And if they understand, even if they know that they're not going to be kicked out of their house, their parents aren't abusive, but they just know their parents, they're not going to go along with what they want to do. They'll say, I don't feel safe. Don't tell my parents. They won't like it. And so they don't. And by the time the parents find out about it, the kids are very far gone. They might have even started puberty blockers. And sometimes then the parents will lose a relationship, or they will fight it. And some will just kind of cave into that because they just don't know what to do and they don't want to lose their children. They love their child. So I'm not trying to punish parents that are kind of, I feel for parents that are trapped in this. But the love bombing, I've sat through professional development where the trainers discuss how to condition and bring a family on board. So don't think that this isn't actively discussed, how to bring a reluctant parent or parents on board, how to make them see the light that they should transition their kids. So you get to this conversions, so-called. What I'm kind of going through your thread right now. This is so people can understand what happens. What are some other things? I think I mentioned they're scared of losing their child. They take them to a gender clinic. What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things, and I think just to, I mean, I hope that their parents also understand there are many examples of parents who have been able to pull their kids out of this,
Yes,
right? So
we know that.
you don't want anyone to be
January Little John. There's a lot of
right.
parents.
There's a lot of hope out there. I think that hopefully in understanding how this system works, it would empower parents to catch things early, right? Before a lot of, like you're saying, like it's been going on for a year and they didn't know. So being the nosy parent, understanding what your school's policies are, those are all really important things. I mean, I did a story about an individual family, and we at the Daily Call News Foundation did a 4-part investigative series last fall about the social services system, because that's another, I mean, I briefly talked about that, but so say, I mean, there are counselors, I know parents who the school counselor has called social services on them and been like, hey, these parents won't affirm this kid. And if you listen to a lot of the materials, I mean, in this big investigation we did, we linked to a lot of these different activist projects, and they genuinely view parents who are not affirming as harming to their children. And one activist even went as far as to say in a HHS call, transphobia is child abuse, like calling transphobia child abuse. And so I think, like, when you hear people say that, understand that they actually do believe it. It's one of those things where it's so crazy where you're like, no one actually believes that, but the system is being kind of cultivated. How you cultivate AI, just think of something, think of like it's being cultivated like that, to view a parent who won't quote unquote affirm their child's new sex as being as abusive as like not feeding them. And so then you have to let your mind go to, well, what are the consequences if a child is being, the rightful consequences if a child is undergoing neglect or physical or any kind of abuse in their house, right? Where we remove kids from abusive situations. Well, now you have where not affirming a child's gender confusion is on par with real abuse. well, that means that that child can be taken away from their home, and it definitely there are examples throughout the country where this has happened, which is absolutely just insane and devastating. So that is something that parents, sadly, when we'll go through, that's a hurdle. Then you have when you get to the hospital systems, I mean, they're all affirming. One of the first things I ever uncovered on this was a hospital training video where they were training the staff to kind of get parents to quote unquote understand that, their child's a different sex now, and we need you to support this. So I think ecosystem is a good way to think about all of this, that it really is an entire ecosystem of bad ideas that allows these insecurities and lies that have been planted in vulnerable children to then grow and flourish to something that ends up impacting, sadly, in an irreversible way, often for their bodies for the rest of their lives.
Well, imagine that you're dealing with this issue. Your child is now wanting to use different pronouns and says usually starts, I feel like I'm non-binary, and then they're quieter. These are some of the things that parents have said, like more reclusive, quieter, where they were full of life and talkative before. Now they're quiet, sullen, dressing differently, changing online a lot, that kind of thing. All red flags. Get involved, danger, danger, get involved right there.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of us know a lot more now than we did back then. And but that starts to happen, and then you start talking to your child and you make it clear, like, listen, I love you, but I'm not going to affirm this. That child tells a counselor, tells a
Mhm.
teacher, that teacher alerts, like you said, alerts the social welfare, child welfare department, a social worker.
Mhm.
They can, in some states, come and come to your house, question you, take your child away, put your child into a foster home.
Mhm.
And there are really horrific examples of what happens when they put the kids into foster homes. These, what do they call them? Glitter, with their glitter family, with their unicorn family, with their LGBTQI plus affirming family. A lot of abuse, and then more brainwashing, indoctrination, and separation of child from parent. So you're a
Mhm.
parent, and now you're stuck. You're like, I live in Illinois, or I live in Minnesota, I live in California, and I could lose my child, and my
Mhm.
child could go down this horrific road, or what? Like, I can fight back,
Mhm.
so I think it's hard, and I think I would fight back. I have no parent, like, they leave the state. I mean,
Mhm.
imagine having to smuggle your own child out of the state, leave in the middle of the night, and just leave everything behind because you've got to get out because you know what's coming next.
Well, there are some states too where kids can self-emancipate. It's as young as, like, I think 14, maybe even, I don't know, 12. I know one state it's 14 where a
Wow.
child could self-emancipate, and then like the sex hormones will be kind of grouped in as, like, as a procedure where a kid could self-consent, similar to abortion, where they could consent, they could get on state Medicaid and the state Medicaid insurance, and kind of leave the home almost, like, at age 14, and the parents would have no say in that. And that's not every state, thankfully, but I don't know if people really understand. I have not personally seen what's going on in the child welfare services really reported on that much, because I do feel like it's a really important piece of this whole pipeline, and it's a really scary piece. And when I was researching for the series we did, I was, as a mother, as just a person, it was very disturbing to me because it was definitely intentionally trying to break that bond between parent and child, and seeing the parent. I mean, parents, like, it's, of course, you do get, there are bad parents out, abusive parents out there, right? That you don't want to say that those situations don't exist, because they do. But I really truly believe the bulk of parents want what's best for their kid. And so when you think your kid's struggling and you're trying to help them, and then you're being deemed as the problem by the state, it's just so, it's just so foundationally wrong, and it's so yeah, it's sad and scary as a parent. But
Yeah, I'm looking
there,
for your article right now as you're talking, but
yeah,
I
it was,
remember that, and I remember posting on that. I was just shocked. I was shocked that, and didn't the Biden administration, weren't they involved in
mhm.
something regarding the foster care industry, and in
Yeah,
order to be qualified to be a foster parent, you would have to affirm, like go through
right.
training, LGBTQI plus training.
There was a rule that was finalized in April of 2024 about foster families being affirming. And the problem is that it's like kind of bakes, when you start creating rules like that, it kind of bakes it in for everyone, right? Like if you're saying it's harmful for foster children to not be affirmed, then you're kind of saying it's like harmful for any child. But so, I mean, the good news is that we are seeing, like, I don't want to get like total doom and gloom, because there is
Yeah,
a lot of positive things. Like we're seeing gender clinics shut down. We're seeing, the PrEP. I don't know if you're familiar with the PrEP program, but I think it was this week, HHS announced that, I think it was California was the latest state. It's a sexual education federal program that was funding a lot of transgender ideology that was mixed in with probably the comprehensive sex ed. So the Trump administration is going after that and telling all these states, like, look, if you want to continue get it being funded for these sex ed materials, like you got to take the gender ideology out of it. But I mean, I still think while all these things are good, they're all kind of temporal fixes, and the problem really is very deep rooted. So it really does take, like good conversations like this, or just people in their everyday lives not being afraid to speak up about this and to say that it's wrong. I think people who work in healthcare have a particular role to play in this, because that is, I mean, you could say the same thing about teachers, healthcare workers, teachers, people speaking up and saying we really need to stop pushing this on kids. And then equipping parents to understand, like, what are the, like you were saying, the red flags, or just the things like like the cell phones. My kids don't have a cell phone, and I feel like that's, my son's 12, and I'm not anywhere near budging on that. It's a hill like I'm ready to die on. At least in regards to a smartphone, maybe we'll get a dumb phone like what I had when I was
yeah, flip
in
phone,
college.
flip phone.
Yeah,
You get a
yeah,
kid,
flip
like
phone.
they hate them, but they work. But like,
Yes.
and I do want to get to good news. To understand, because like what we're talking about is for those who, because if you've been reading it online a lot, like how did we get here? How
Mhm.
is it, or folks who will say, even that are more conservative or traditional, to say, well, you can't blame gender ideology for what's happening and the rise in shootings and attacks and these kind of what's happening, the language and the vitriol, and but when you notice all these high profile uh, situations have a common denominator, we have to point it out. We have to say, like, okay, there is a common theme happening. The people that tried to assassinate the president, and like it kind of, there's a age range, there's a background, that kind of a lot of similarities, and what's happening in schools. You have to know these things, because to understand why it's important that when we're in school boards and we're fighting to say, like, this isn't healthy for children, it's not good to brainwash children, this isn't science, this isn't the gold standard. And when we're fighting back at the federal level, the state level, the local level, all levels, against policies and funding of this meant this it, that it this isn't about politics, like you said. And it isn't about politics for me. This is about sanity and doing what's right. I'm still doing this 5 years later. Sometimes there's politicians that'll tell you, stop talking about it. We want to stop talking about it. And I refuse, like, because it matters what's happening. It's indicative of a larger decay of truth, of our country, of our values, of our liberty, of our freedom. It all comes together, and in this like horrible, like, witch's brew that we need to address. We can't just ignore it. We can't say, oh, it was the gun, not the mental illness, not the message that's being sent, the institutional message that it's okay if you're going after Christian kids. It's okay if you're going after certain people. No othering. No, on either side, we should not other. And I'm not trying to engage in othering, but to point out that there's a real phenomenon that we can address, that we have the ability to address and to start to course correct if we just recognize what's going on and stop playing political games.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think
I
that,
mean, all sides, no games.
yeah.
I don't want this to be a political issue for the next midterm. I want to solve this problem now. I want to do real things that matter. And HHS tells one thing, states to remove the mention of gender ideology in sex ed courses or lose funding. And I will tell you that the funding for most of this curriculum, it's technically free to school districts. That's a lot of reason time why they use it. So if it's not funded by HHS, it makes it a lot harder for a school district to use because they like free stuff. They don't pay attention too much. You know what I mean? I think you've done the research on this. You've done enough FOIA requests that if we pull the funding on this sex ed curriculum, that actually will do a lot of good, because it's not free. If the state Department of Education, like in Wisconsin, can't claim this is free, we can use it. It was a federal grant. HHS was one of the funders, as well as the CDC, all part of their program. Part of their sex ed program to reduce HIV, to reduce pregnancies. They add all of the stuff that's not controversial. They add the non-controversial stuff to this curriculum so that they can backdoor all the bad stuff. Am I wrong here?
No, I mean, that's why I think the HHS and the Trump administration are really combing through all of this and making sure that it does not include bad science, such as telling someone they can change their sex. I've even seen examples of federal grants. I forget offhand if it was this specific one, but given directly to like the school GSA club to host their GSA event. And that's because it's part of creating, per the grants, a safe and supportive school environment. So, I mean, when you
We
have
talked about that.
yeah, if you have a grant and then saying, oh, it's supposed to be creating a safe and supportive school environment, which is kind of, if you read into it more, means creating a quote unquote safe and supportive environment for LGBTQ ideology. Then you can then use the funds for things like GSA events, which are completely ideologically driven.
Yes.
And there's going directly from your federal tax dollars to, a party where kids are being told they are being affirmed as transgender at a public school. And you think about that, it's pretty wild.
I have so much. I'm looking right now because I have so many slides with images from that. But if you pull the funding, the public school districts are always strapped. They're always strapped. They're always, I've yet to see the school district that is like, we have a surplus. Every once in a while, their good ones can balance their budget, but most, even those that are trying, hard to not overspend, like they're overspending. They need money. They're always trying to look for a federal grant. Hitting in the pocketbook, removing the funding for this stuff is huge. And I think starting to fund the good, because here's another problem. Well, if we don't use this, oftentimes I'll have school board members tell me we can't find there's nothing out there. So we do have to, there's certain state federal guidelines we have to follow. There's a certain amount of human growth and development we have to give, or we have to, have a science class. We have to have, and follow, certain standards, just academic standards. And if you take all the woke curriculum out, there is no curriculum. So we have to build systems. We can't just tear things down. We have to build new things and provide provide curriculum that would be acceptable in a public school, non-religious curriculum that is free of all of the ideological and political, stuff, and for lack of a better word, and just try and get back to more of the basics. And I think that I'm hopeful that the Trump administration is going to be rolling up their sleeves and getting to work on this. And from what I've seen from the Department of Education, they are looking to not just rid the woke, but to find those resources and companies and that will provide something that's better as an alternative, because we need to have more books. We need more traditional folks, don't have to be conservative, but traditional folks writing things, make stories, write curriculum, get involved and provide an alternative for schools, for families, all of the above. What other good news? You mentioned some other things that HHS is doing.
Well, I mean, President Trump had a series of executive orders early on in his presidency, which really were eradicating gender ideology from being federally funded. So the trickle down effect of that is we're seeing across the country gender programs, in a lot of them in swing or blue states that don't have laws banning sex change procedures for kids, which are actually saying, look, we're going to shut down because we don't want to jeopardize the finances of our hospitals. If you start digging into financials of hospitals, a lot of them they're getting a lot of federal funding for research, for various programs. So I think hitting them in their pocketbook is very effective because they can't lose that funding. So it's great. I mean, it's good. I just think about kids who are being saved from a lifetime of harm. But I do think it's kind of putting a Band-Aid to a degree. Like the idea that the battle for gender ideology is over is like, so I just can't even process that when people say things like that, or like woke is dead. I'm like, I don't think so. Um, there really needs to be legislation, federal legislation, like saying, you know what, we recognize in America that it's wrong to perform a double mastectomy on a 14-year-old girl who has some confusion over her sex. So I think that is definitely needed, but it's a good start, and we'll see what happens. I
Yeah.
probably actually have like to go in like 2 minutes, so
Okay, so yeah, I know gosh, every time I have you on, we could just keep talking.
I could
But
keep talking for
yes, I have to I have some things I have to do with the kids as well. But I did want to end it. So I think that's kind of a good note to end it on. Good note that a lot of what we're talking about, Biden administration, but built way before then. These institutions, this kind of institutional capture, this didn't just happen overnight. So where we've been, but the war against woke is not over. It's really just begun. We've really just begun the battle. Now it's going to be a lot more time and a lot more things are going to have to be done to really affect change. But we are seeing some really good signs with what's happening with the Trump administration, defunding. But what is your final words of advice to parents, even those who aren't affected by this, grandparents? How can we all help? What can we do to make a change?
Yeah, I mean, I think knowledge is power, right? I think that parents should be very leery of giving their child a cell phone. I would say there's a lot of good books. You have Abigail Shrier's book Bad Therapy kind of touched on the issue a bit. I haven't read it yet, but I've seen some of Jonathan Haidt's work on cell phones. I know that was like a real big thing, just talking about really rethinking how much time kids are on screens. And I think keep building things in the real world, right? It's easy to get caught up in this or that, but I think there's so many. I had dinner with a mom, sorority mom this week, and just keep advocating for kids and building things in the real world. Love your family, and do all those things, because life really is beautiful, and these topics are heavy. I know, doing this for 3 years, like, it's a very heavy topic, and it's some days you just think, oh my gosh, this is so like it's so much, but then when you balance it with your life of just having your family and your friends and
Yes.
making sure to enjoy and remember what a beautiful country we live in. And it really is such a gift that all of us are able to play a role in helping shape our communities. And sometimes it's hard. I know from experience, sometimes it's really hard, especially when you're getting pushback from people that are in your own community. But I'd say keep it up and just keep finding all the beautiful things in life, because there are so many things to be thankful for.
That's a great positive way to end. And I know a lot of people listening will say, well, maybe I don't have kids in school, or I do, and I don't see this, we don't deal with this. And that's understandable. But enough kids, and unfortunately, it's the kids that are most vulnerable and
Mhm.
troubled that are affected by this. And as we saw with the tragedy in Minnesota, it will eventually affect you. Even if in your area, you can say like we've dealt with this, and in my school district, we've got it covered. But as long as this is woke has an institutional capture, we're all going to still have to deal with the effects of what's happening to kids and the brainwashing. And as far as when it comes to medicine, we cannot turn a blind eye when American medicine is living in fantasy land. We cannot turn a blind eye when our medical professionals feel bullied into silence about what's really happening to kids, and when kids that identify as trans and that are struggling with these identity issues. That's not acceptable. We have to do something. It's important to do something. So I'm glad. Thank you for all the research you do. Thank you for the writing that you do. And we'll talk again soon.
Yeah,
Let
thank
you
you so much,
Can't
Scarlett.
wait
Thanks
for your
for
next
everything.
article.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. Thank you
All right.
very much.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
That was, as always, a great conversation with my friend Meg. And I lose track of time. I mean, how long have we been? It's been an hour and a half. Like it's fine. This is a live stream. That's why I do this. When the purpose of what Unplugged and what I'm doing is that I don't want to say we have a half hour and that's it. I want to talk as long as we can. As long as someone's willing to stay on and have this conversation with me, I will continue to have the conversation, because there's always just so much to talk about, and in a real way, just trying to talk about it in a very real way. And I think it's good, again, to mention the cuts that are being made, the reforms that the Trump administration is fighting very hard to defund, these programs, to defund, in fact, defund the sex ed programs, defund gender ideology, remove woke programs from K through 12 schools, to clean up what's happening in the Department of Education, to reduce the size and to give more power to the states and more funding to the states, and working with the big beautiful bill trying to actually fund the alternatives that parents and kids deserve, so that they can escape a public school system that's failing them, oftentimes, especially in blue states. Although they're the movement for universal school choice is new, but it's off to a great start. School choice has been around for a while now, but it's always been small pilot programs, usually for funding only for families that are economically very poor, or you know, at really struggling. And now it's school choice for all families. We're trying to change that so that all families have the opportunity to choose a different school, because you could be in a suburban school district and you could be in rural Wisconsin or rural Minnesota, and any area where there isn't a choice for you. You can't, maybe homeschooling, but you can't, you work, there's all of these things. So trying to provide real choice by providing incentives and funding in very creative ways through the tax credits that can be given, and then that might incentivize the growth of more school choice, more building more schools, expanding school choice programs. There's usually long waiting lists, so we're doing what we can. But I have kids in public school. I'm sure many of you have kids in public school, and maybe you're happy. As far as I am, like it's maybe it could be better, but it's okay. I'm happy. Trying to maintain the fact that there are good schools out there. There are good school districts, and you want them to succeed. You want your community public education to thrive, and you don't want it to succumb to radical ideology, because it just destroys a whole school system. And frankly, one or two radical woke ideologues in a school system can really bring a whole school system down. So there are good things happening. There are lawsuits happening. There every day something new. Just yesterday, the Department of Education released a statement about schools in Denver, Colorado, that are a school district that is violating Title IX, and that they are taking action. So I get the press releases, and every day, I see a new way in which the Trump administration is really fighting for us, fighting for team sanity, fighting for regular families. And in light of the tragedy of Minneapolis, we want to make sure that things like that never happen again. And it's a big problem. Not trying to say you could pin everything down to woke gender ideology in schools, but it certainly plays a role in the violence that we have been seeing in schools. And the fact that the mainstream media refuses to be honest with us about this is shocking. So I have to tell the truth, as do other outlets, other non-traditional new media outlets. We have to say the quiet part out loud. What is happening in schools is unacceptable. And as the title of this episode is, there is a price that we pay for gender ideology in schools. And I don't want to pay it anymore. And I'm sure you don't either. Make sure that you follow Meg. She is an investigative reporter. And if you go to, I'm going to provide for the Daily Caller. So the Daily Caller, Meg Brock, follow her work, read some of the reports that we mentioned in this episode, in this podcast. Eye-opening, enlightening. Follow her on X. You can follow Meg Brock at quite simple, at Meg E. Brock, and I'll put that into the make a quick banner about that. Make sure that you are also following Moms for Liberty, and follow us on X at Moms4 Liberty. And that's our social media tagline across all platforms. And very soon, what I'm doing here will have a like and subscribe on YouTube and all platforms in which you can hear or watch podcasts. Working on that. Hopefully that'll be done in the next few weeks. You could follow and like and subscribe to the Fire of Liberty show. That is a podcast, Tina Deskovich, every Wednesday, right live on all social media platforms, every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We also have Moms for Liberty Academy, live streams, videos, resources, and you simply need to go to the Moms for Liberty website and learn more about all of those things. And if you would like to learn more about Moms for Liberty, join Moms for Liberty, just go to momsforliberty.org. And again, I'm going to really quickly put up to follow Meg because she deserves a follow. There we go. So follow Meg. Add that right now. At Meg E. Brock on X. So follow her. Go to view her investigative reports are excellent. And now I'm going to sign off the way I always do and the way I will continue to do until registration is closed for the Moms for Liberty Joyful Warrior Summit taking place October 16th through the 18th. We are announcing today our first speaker, who will be Jennifer Say. And every day we're going to announce more speakers, and it's great. It's a wonderful, wonderful event. Learn more about that and register at momsforliberty.org. Make sure you do that. momsforliberty.org. And so I hope that you enjoy this Labor Day weekend and take time and spend with your families. Take a break and then suit up and get ready to get back and fight for your kids. Bye, everybody.
Elena, what state are you from?
New York.
Hawaii.
I'm from Texas, Washington. I have my kids actually with me to do the march.
Wherever I go, odds are there is a Moms for Liberty group or a whole tribe in the room sounding off loud and proud.
And you could see the passion here because it's about supporting kids.
Pledge to each other that we will live like men and women who are determined to remain free.
I'm for parental rights all the way.